shields of smoke and stone. Caractul Anchorage Theta. When the 66th Halvorn Line Infantry were dropped to Anchorage Theta, they'd filled the landing yards in proud formation, rows of disciplined soldiers, all shining flakplate and vox hymns. The upper works bristled with heavy guns. The command staff still used words like rotation and redeployment. There were 700 proud members of the Emperor's Astra Militarum, ready to fight in his name. That was 2 weeks ago. Now there were 57 left uninjured, maybe 24 more with wounds that wouldn't kill them immediately. The upper works were gone, devoured by the Tyranids. The shaft had become a tomb. No more command staff, no more vox traffic, just rock, blood and spores. Lieutenant Sarah Brann crouched low behind a rusted track hauler at the edge of the main gantry, one eye fixed on the darkness below. The spore-choked air was warm and wet, making her skin itch. She'd tied an old ration wrap around her mouth just to breathe. They hadn't had a real night's rest since the third day. The swarms came in waves, tested their defenses and always found a new way in. A cracked wall panel, a fractured pipe, a collapsed stairwell, and now it was nearly dusk again. She turned to the man beside her. Sergeant Koril, built like an old brick kiln, with a longlass cradled in his lap and a splint lashed to his shattered leg. "Ammo?" she asked. Stubbers almost dry. Second squad's down to hotshot packs and swearing. If you want us to hold, we can curse them to death. Brann allowed the ghost of a smile. "You've cursed worse." "Yeah, once cursed a Munitorum clerk so hard he wet himself and sent us double rations." He paused. "Might be time to try again." A laugh rippled from nearby troopers. Thin, bitter, still human. Then came the sound, skittering, clicking claws on stone, soft then louder. Trooper Halvorn flinched, his grip tightening on his las rifle. Just a kid, barely out of hive training. Brann raised a fist. The laughter died instantly. A vent panel 30 meters out began to bulge outward, slick with moisture. Elsewhere, a grating snapped. The chittering rose into a shriek. "Stand to!" Brann shouted. "Gantry front, lower access." Laser guns rose, grenades primed. The wounded behind them stirred, some to pray, others to crawl toward the nearest weapon. Then the Tyranids hit. They poured from 3 points at once, horrors of chitin and fang rushing low and fast. The first wave were gaunts, dozens of them. Las fire met them with a snap-crack rhythm, burning holes through skulls and limbs, but the swarm didn't pause. Brann dropped one that leapt too close, then another. They just kept coming. Trooper Relis was dragged down, screaming, 3 gaunts tearing at her flak. "Back, pull to fallback point Gamma," Brann yelled. Koril fired his longlass, taking a warrior in the eye. It still slammed into the gantry, body twitching. And then came the second wave. Taller, broader shapes. Tyranid warriors with scything talons and bone rifles burst through the smoke. The heavy stubber spat wildly before jamming. Someone hurled a frag into the dark. The detonation lit the tunnel for a heartbeat, and in that heartbeat, Brann saw it. A new shadow, not chitin, not Tyranid. Something massive and armored moved behind the swarm. For a split second, she thought it was a Carnifex, but the silhouette was wrong. Too straight, too controlled. Then the sound came. Thum, thum, thum. A burst of concussive bolter fire from behind the Xenos. The Tyranids stumbled. Another burst followed, and then a shape burst from the tunnel. Black-armored, massive spear held high and wreathed in steam. One of the swarm lunged at him and was obliterated, its torso cored by a bolt shell the size of a guard trooper's fist. Then another shape burst from the tunnel, and another and more. A whole strike formation of giants in obsidian plate, emerging like wrath from the very tunnels that had birthed the enemy. They weren't alone. Brann blinked. The realization struck like a shovel to the chest. The Tyranids weren't the only ones using the tunnels. The Emperor's Angels of Death had arrived. They came in force. A whole strike formation, at least a full demi-company, emerging like wrath from the very tunnels that had birthed the enemy. Astartes in obsidian black plate with glimmering teal eye lenses, striding through the smoke and ichor. No war cry, no chant, just fire and steel. The Tyranids reeled, caught between hammer and anvil. Warriors turned too slowly and were bisected by chain blades or impaled on barbed spears. Gaunts scattered in all directions, many simply gunned down as they fled. A sergeant, marked by a pale stripe of coral across his helm, moved with grim efficiency. His spear punched through one creature's chest, then was wrenched free with a motion that shattered bone. He raised his bolter, fired once. Another warrior collapsed with half its head missing. Brann barely had time to think. Koril muttered, stunned. They came up behind them, through the Xeno tunnels. Brann nodded. That's our rear now. Within minutes it was over. The gantry smoked with heat and gore. Tyranid corpses littered the battlefield. The rest were gone, rooted or vaporized. One Astartes approached, stepping over broken machinery. His spear was slick with alien ichor, his black armor scorched but unbowed. He removed his helm, revealing a face carved from granite, tattooed across the cheek with faded sea runes. Cold eyes swept across the guardsman. "I am Sergeant Vicato of the Obsidian Spears chapter," he said. His voice was deep, steady. He looked at Brann. "You have held against the tide long enough." Sergeant Vicato's voice didn't carry like a shout. It didn't need to. It settled like something heavy placed on solid ground. Unshakable, final. Brann lowered her las pistol, which she hadn't even realized she still held at arm's length. Her pulse thudded against her eardrums. Sweat ran down the back of her neck and soaked into the inside of her collar. It was the first time she'd truly paused in days. Vicato turned his head slowly, taking in the destruction around them. 34 guardsmen still able to stand. The rest lay in corners, on stretchers, or in pools of their own effort. Smoke from hot weapons and ruptured organisms drifted like low fog. Behind him, more Obsidian Spears moved with disciplined coordination. Some were securing the tunnel the Tyranids had used, others moving towards secondary access points, weapons at the ready. One had paused to crush a still twitching gaunt underfoot without even looking down. Brann cleared her throat. "Lieutenant Sarah Brann, Halvorn, 66th. Her voice came out hoarse. "You're late." It wasn't meant to be gallows humor, but Koril barked a quiet laugh behind her. Vicato's expression didn't shift. "You held, that's what mattered." She stepped forward, motioning for her remaining troops to lower their weapons. Some did, some just stared. "We thought the entire moon was lost," she said, trying to reassert some command presence. "Vox went out 5 days ago. We assumed we'd been abandoned." Vicato looked at her for a long moment, then gestured to the collapsed tunnel. The enemy began to infest their own pathways beneath the crust. We feared an open push would draw the swarm too early. So we came below, through their own hunting burrows. Brann rubbed at her face. Her hand came away smeared with soot and dried blood. "How many of you?" 112 Astartes, Vicato said. 5th and 7th strike claws. 3 dreadnoughts. We made planetfall by subaquatic capsule through the eastern basin, then burrowed up through the hive tunnels. She blinked at him. That number, a full company strength formation. She hadn't expected more than a token response. "Hell of an entrance," she muttered. Vicato didn't react. His expression barely changed, his face set in that distant, ocean-still mask that all Astartes seemed to wear. He turned his gaze toward the wounded now being tended to by the less injured. "You will fall back to Anchorage Sigma. Reinforcements are inbound there. Medici, Vox re-establishment, shelter." Something in her, tightly wound and near to snapping, loosened. It wasn't joy, wasn't hope, just space, room to breathe. One of the wounded troopers muttered, "Prayed for the Emperor to send his angels. He sent a mountain with a spear instead." Vicato didn't respond, only tilted his head slightly. Brann turned back to him. "What's next? If your force is that large, you're not just pulling us out." "No," Vicato said. "We strike upward, clear shaft by shaft. Exterminate the infestation from within before it reaches the surface cities." She blinked. "You're staying?" "Until the work is done." The words landed heavier than gunfire. She glanced back at the broken bodies behind her. Men and women who'd fought every hour of every day, knowing they were being picked off, knowing their position was a death trap, and fighting anyway. The idea of going forward, of pressing into the tunnels instead of out of them, felt unreal. "We can't fight anymore," she said quietly. "Not really. Most of us are spent. Half can't even hold a rifle." Vicato nodded and placed his helmet back on. "You are only human," he replied, with no apparent trace of humor. "We will finish the fight." Brann swallowed hard. Her throat hurt. Not from emotion, just the weight of it all. Then I guess we owe you our lives. No! Vicato's gaze fixed on her. You earned your survival. That was the first time anything like respect had entered his voice, and it hit harder than any praise from a general. Behind them, more of the Obsidian Spears were moving past now. Silent, purposeful shadows headed deeper into the tunnel system. They barely looked at the guard as they passed, not out of disdain, but because their minds were already focused on the next battle. And they looked like they belonged down here, like the smoke and blood and dark didn't faze them, as if the very void had spat them into the earth and told them to walk until the monsters were gone. Vicato stepped aside and nodded once. Fall back. Gather your wounded together. Your duty is fulfilled here. She hesitated, then saluted. May the Emperor watch you, Sergeant. He returned the salute in a way she hadn't seen before. 2 fingers to the chest, then to the brow. And may he remember your dead. Then he turned, spear in hand, and followed his brothers into the dark. Brann watched him go until the smoke swallowed his form. Then she turned and faced what remained of her command. All right, she said louder now. You heard the man. We're pulling back. Gather the wounded, what kit you can carry. We move before they collapse another tunnel behind us. A few nodded. Some still sat, stunned. A handful wept silently. But for the first time in days, they moved with a purpose other than surviving the next 30 seconds. Because someone bigger than the darkness had come walking through it. Not angels, not salvation. Just giants in black, with spears of stone and voices like deep water, reminding them that the line had never truly broken. The gantry faded behind them. The stink of spent promethium and blood hung in the air, but Vicato no longer registered it. His auto senses adjusted to the gloom ahead, shifting from visible spectrum to infrared and back again in slow, blinking pulses. Vicato adjusted his grip on his spear. Bone chips still clung to the barbed edge. The memory of the guardsman lingered. 34 survivors, emaciated, exhausted, yet they held. He respected that, not because of what it meant tactically, but because it proved something he rarely saw in the wider Imperium: spiteful defiance. That was close to the sea virtue of Tohe, the rising will, not submission, not discipline, but the will to endure when only failure remained. He stored that thought. It was not yet time for reflection. The tunnel split ahead. Vicato signaled silently with 2 fingers. Brother Hikora moved to the left flank, his heavy bolter low, the long barrel swaying like the snout of a deep fish ready to strike. Movement, came the voice of Brother Nawa, flat and even over squad vox. Multiple contacts, low center heat crawling, 2 o'clock. Vicato turned his gaze down the resin-thickened slope. Heat signatures flared through the gloom, small, quick-bodied organisms. He raised a hand. The formation halted. Then he sent the order. Silence became thunder. 3 bolters roared, their reports deafening in the enclosed space. The first wave of gaunts shredded apart, ichor splattering the walls in wet arcs. A screamer killer shrieked further back in the dark, but Vicato was already moving. He surged forward, spear angled low, boot slamming through a skittering form that hadn't yet registered his presence. The creature's skull burst like a shellfish under stone. He drove the spear forward, impaling a leaping warrior through its midsection and pinning it to the wall. With a twist, he split it in 2. To his left, Nawa dropped another with a burst of mass-reactive fire. To his right, Brother Tabahi was laughing again, his chainsword howling as he cleaved through a knot of feeder beasts, carving wide sweeps through the tunnel. Vicato, rear right wall, pulse vent, came the warning. He pivoted just in time to see the vent bulge, and a lictor uncoil from the shadows. It struck, lightning fast, limbs like scythes. Vicato ducked under one swipe, rolled forward, came up inside its reach. The spear stabbed once, too shallow. The creature hissed, slammed its talons down toward his helm. He caught one blow with the haft, the other with his pauldron. Alarms flashed in the corner of his vision, armor scoring, joint stress. He didn't care. Vicato grabbed the lictor's throat with his free hand, shoved it back and headbutted it. Once, twice, a crack, the creature screeched. He drove the butt of the spear into its chest, then spun the weapon in a full circle and rammed the blade through its open mouth. It twitched once, then went limp. The whole fight took 6 seconds. He stepped over the corpse. Contact broken, he said. Minimal losses, Hekora reported. One minor breach on Brother Tivatu's vambrace, no casualties. Faikato turned his eyes forward again. The path narrowed ahead. Tyranid scent glands coated the walls, musk and pheromone trails glowing faintly in the dark. That meant they were nearing a node, a control point. And that meant a synapse beast was near. Good. They would cut out the brain. Form kill line pattern, advance 5 meters, burn as we go. Flamers came forward. Liquid fire spilled down the walls, catching resin and alien eggs alike. The shrieks of larval organisms dying in the heat barely registered. Faikato voxed his second. Brother Kokua, rear flank is secured, anchorage theta relieved. A pause, then came the reply, distorted slightly by the vox in the tunnel. Acknowledged. Our tunnel joins yours in 1 click. Meet at the throat. Then we rise. He nodded once to no one. Good. The line would not just hold, it would advance. They called it a control node in command briefings. But there were no terminals, no logic circuits, no Tactica command boards, only meat grown in thrones of bone and slime. And it thought. Faikato stood just beyond the bend that opened into the central throat of the Tyranid burrow cluster. A pulsating antechamber lined with bloated sacs and twitching feeder tendrils. The air was rank with rot and ammonia. Hot. Alive. Bioforms moved along the walls and floor. Spine gaunts. Warriors. A pair of zoanthropes floated near the ceiling like diseased blisters. Something larger moved behind them, visible only in silhouette, a hulking mass with too many limbs and a crown of sensory feelers. A synapse creature. He raised 2 fingers and circled his fist. Kill pattern Taukoru. The squad shifted. 2 flamer brothers forward, 1 heavy bolter anchoring the line. The rest formed staggered attack points, spear and bolt arrayed like a black reef preparing to grind a tide to pieces. Faikato keyed the squad vox. This is where they know we've come, and where they learn we never leave. Then he stepped through. The first flamer unleashed a roaring tide of burning promethium that swept over a dozen gaunts. They shrieked as their shells blistered and burst, scrambling blindly even as their tissues melted from their bones. Bolter fire cracked behind him, the disciplined rhythm of Brother Nawa chewing through the left flank. Faikato moved like water through stone. He plunged his spear through the sternum of a leaping gaunt, swung it into a warrior mid-pounce, and kicked another aside like a toy. His focus narrowed. Movement, weight, trajectory. Each action born not from thought, but from instinct honed over 2 centuries. Then he heard it. A howl, more a psychic pulse than a sound, high-pitched and nauseating, pressing against the skull. The zoanthropes. Lightning flared, not heat or energy but raw warp discharge, streaking across the chamber in coiling arcs. 1 bolt caught Brother Tavahi square in the torso. He convulsed mid-stride. His chainsword tumbled from his grip. The ceramite of his breastplate ruptured, buckling inward with a crunch. He collapsed to his knees, helm jerking once, then falling forward. Dead? Brother down, came Hekora's voice, cold and calm. Faikato didn't hesitate. Flank the left neuroforms, target priority, zoanthropes, bring them down. The spears surged like a school of predators, dispersing, reforming, turning the knot of bioforms into a storm of reactive fury. A warrior beast rushed Faikato all carapace and claw. He didn't let it close. He threw his spear. It caught the creature between the eyes. It staggered once and slumped. Faikato was already in motion, wrenching his spear free from the dead warrior and swinging it into a second beast's abdomen with both hands. To his right, a grunt of pain. Tivatu down beneath a seething mass of gaunts. One had gotten under his guard, sinking barbed claws into the joint of his knee. Another struck his exposed flank. He didn't cry out, only voxed, for the depth. His final act was to detonate the cracked charge at his hip. The blast tore apart the gaunts and part of Tivatu. The shockwave threw 6 of the enemy back into the wall, where they twitched like spiked insects. Faikato felt nothing. Loss was tide. Inevitable, it came and it went, and the reef remained. He leapt to a raised outgrowth of stone and pointed his spear directly at the largest form in the back of the chamber. The synapse beast, a hive tyrant, wings clipped by the low ceiling but still vast. a crown of flesh spines and drooling mandibles. It shrieked with more hate than sound, its psychic pressure radiating in waves. "I see the throat," Vicato roared. "Cut it, kill it." The tyrant charged. It slammed through its own brood to reach them. Two Astartes were swatted aside like debris, one against the wall with a sickening crunch, another pinned by a lash whip that tore through his shoulder plate. Vicato met it head-on. He ducked low, spun aside at the last instant, and slashed across the creature's thigh. Acid blood sprayed, but not enough. The beast turned, swiping at him with a barbed claw the size of a tank tread. He parried with his spear, using the haft to deflect the blow, but the impact still knocked him back, boots skidding. His left pauldron cracked. Warning runes lit across his helm visor. Then Nawa struck. The bolter roared at near point-blank range, and the tyrant reeled as 3 rounds pierced its side. Another marine launched himself from behind, a power sword biting deep into its flank. The beast howled and struck back. It impaled the swordsman through the abdomen, lifted him into the air and slammed him to the ground. His vitals flatlined mid-fall. Vicato didn't let rage touch him. Rage was heat, he was cold like the depth. He lunged again, this time leaping onto the creature's back. His spear drove down between the spinal ridges, once, twice, then a third time. The tyrant roared, bucking, slamming him against the wall. Pain flared. One rib cracked, blood in his mouth. He held on. "Now," he growled. Hekora's heavy bolter opened up once more, this time into the beast's face. Shells exploded through its eye cluster. Bone and neural jelly sprayed across the chamber. The beast gave one last violent shudder and collapsed forward like a falling tower, crushing 2 of its own. The silence that followed was wet and thick. The last few gaunts convulsed, leaderless, lost without the psychic tether. The zoanthropes had long since been burned down. The node pulsed once, then began to sag, its living walls sloughing off in death. Vicato stood slowly, spear in hand, armor cracked, vision red-tinged. 5 brothers dead, but the throat was sealed. "This chamber is secure," he voxed, calm again. "Hive node neutralized. Begin biomatter sterilization." He turned once more to the tunnel's edge, toward the path upward. There were more nodes to carve, more tunnels to burn. But one more stone had been placed. The reef held. The depths did not forget. The journey to Anchorage Sigma was a ghost walk. The 34 troopers of the 66th moved through the service tunnels in a daze, their footfalls echoing in a silence that felt both sacred and deeply wrong. For 2 weeks, silence had meant death was hunting. Now it was meant to be a reprieve. Brann couldn't decide which was worse. She kept seeing movement in the corners of her vision, flinching at the scrape of a boot on loose scree. Koril, his splinted leg propped on the shoulders of 2 other troopers who took turns carrying him, broke the quiet. "Never thought I'd see a space marine," he rasped, his voice full of awe. "Let alone a whole damn company of them. They move like ghosts made of rock." "They move like they're here to win," Brann corrected, though she knew what he meant. There was an unsettling grace to their brutality, an economy of violence that was as mesmerizing as it was terrifying. They hadn't come to hold the line. They had come to erase the enemy. "Either way," Halvorn, the kid, piped up from behind her, "I'm just glad they're on our side." A murmur of agreement rippled through the column. Hope, brittle and thin, was starting to knit them back together. The thought of medici, of hot rations, of a reinforced bastion waiting for them was a powerful balm. It took them nearly 2 hours to reach the coordinates Vicato had provided. The tunnel opened into a cavernous, well-lit space, Anchorage Sigma. It was a primary staging area, far larger than the gantry they'd defended. Prefabricated command tents stood in neat rows. The air hummed with the thrum of a working generator, and the scent of promethium was clean, not choked with the sweet rot of Xenos biology. And there were people, dozens of them. Guardsmen in crisp, clean fatigues moved with purpose. A medici station was already set up, its white canvas walls glowing from within. At the center of it all stood an officer, his uniform immaculate, watching their approach. Brann felt the tension in her shoulders ease for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. It was real. They were safe. As they stumbled into the light, the officer strode forward to meet them. He was older, with a neatly trimmed moustache and a calm paternal air. His insignia marked him as a captain of the 81st Cadian Rifles, a welcome, legendary sight. "Lieutenant Brann?" he asked, his voice smooth and reassuring. "I am Captain Valerius. We were told to expect you. By the throne, you look like you've been through hell." "That's one word for it, sir," Brann replied, her exhaustion making it hard to form sentences. "The Obsidian Spears Astartes made contact. They're clearing the lower tunnels." "So we've heard. True angels," Valerius said with a serene smile. He gestured to the Medici tent. "Get your people seen to. We have water, nutrient paste, and proper medical supplies. Your fight is over, Lieutenant." The words were everything she had longed to hear. Her troopers began to shuffle past, some leaning on their new comrades from the 81st, who guided them gently toward the tents. Koril was carefully lifted and carried toward the surgeons. Brann remained, feeling the need to make a formal report. "Captain, the swarm is adaptive. They use tunnels we didn't have on any schematic. If the Astartes are pushing up, you need to be ready for—" "All in good time, Lieutenant," Valerius interrupted softly. He placed a hand on her shoulder. It was surprisingly heavy. "Rest first, you've earned it. All of you have." He offered her a metal canteen. "Here, you're dehydrated." She took it gratefully, her throat raw. The water was cool and clean. As she drank, she looked around at the anchorage. The Cadians were efficient, quiet. They moved with a placid certainty that was calming. Yet something felt off. A detail she couldn't place. It was in their eyes, a shared, placid stare that seemed to look right through her. Valerius watched her, his smile never wavering. A terrible ordeal. But the great deliverer provides for us all, and you have brought us a great gift. Brann lowered the canteen, frowning. "Gift, sir?" "The Astartes," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "You led them right into the heart of the nest. They will purge the unthinking ones, the vanguard. They will clear the way for the true ascension." Her blood went cold. She looked from his unwavering smile to the troopers of the 81st. She saw it now. It wasn't discipline in their eyes. It was devotion. The aquila on their uniforms. The wings were subtly wrong. More serpentine. Coiled. Her gaze snapped to the captain's wrist as he gestured to one of his men. For a fleeting second, his cuff slid back, revealing a tattoo just beneath the skin, a three-armed sigil with a fanged alien head at its center. She looked at her own people. One of her wounded troopers was on a cot, a Cadian medic leaning over him. The medic wasn't injecting stims. He was holding the trooper's head, his own jaw unhinging slightly, a slick, hidden inner mouth glistening in the lamplight. They hadn't been led to a relief station. They had been led to a larder. Valerius leaned in closer, his paternal smile turning predatory. His breath smelled faintly of rot. "They will cleanse the brood," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with fanaticism. "And then the Patriarch will have no rivals when he claims this world. The day of ascension is at hand." Brann didn't hesitate. She slammed the canteen into Valerius's face, the metal striking bone with a crunch. He staggered back, blood blooming beneath one nostril, and then smiled wider. "Glorious," he whispered, eyes alight with fervor. "You understand now?" Brann was already moving, yanking her sidearm from its holster. The first shot punched a hole through the temple of the foe medic, crouched over one of her troopers. The cultist collapsed in a heap, his inner jaw still twitching. "Guns up," she shouted. "This isn't a relief station, it's a nest." Her voice cut through the daze like a bolt round. The troopers of the 66th reacted on instinct. Those who could stand raised laser guns, those who couldn't crawled for weapons or shouted warnings. A few were already dead, injected with toxins, smothered, fed upon while too delirious to notice. The 81st Cadian Rifles, or whatever thing wore their uniforms, turned as one. Gone was the mask of calm discipline. Their faces split with fanatical joy, eyes gleaming with devotion. Some drew knives, others dropped their weapons entirely, arms outstretched in welcoming madness. "Ascend," one shrieked. "The flesh shall be remade." The cavern exploded into violence. Brann fired until her charge pack whined dry. Koril, still splintered and on the ground, managed to draw his sidearm and shoot a cultist in the throat. Halvorn tackled another, stabbing wildly with his bayonet, even as the thing beneath him screamed in two voices. They fought like cornered animals, because they were. Brann ducked behind a crate, dragging a wounded trooper with her. A bolt round cracked past her skull, not from a cultist, but from one of the stolen weapons the false Cadians had somehow kept hidden in plain sight. One shot took another of her people, Jepson, through the chest, and he died with a gasp and a gurgle. "Brann," Koril bellowed, "we're getting pinned, no cover, too many." He was right. The anchorage had become a killing ground, lit in flickering yellows and reds as gunfire and plasma bolts ripped through the tent rows. A cultist ignited a fuel drum with a stolen melter charge, turning part of the camp into a roaring inferno. She heard chanting, dozens of voices calling out in harmony. Glory to the Patriarch, glory to the Father beneath. Something deeper echoed beneath their words. A psychic pressure, oily and invasive, scratched at the back of her skull. Her heart was hammering. The 66th would die here on the edge of salvation, eaten not by beasts but by those who had once worn their own uniforms. Brann braced herself against a supply crate, trying to get her bearings. Chaos reigned. The 66th were scattering under fire, hemmed in by betrayal on all sides. They were going to be overrun. Then her vox crackled, static at first. Then a single guttural voice came through, distorted by age and machine growl. "I heard your signal." She froze. The channel had been dead. No one was broadcasting. She hadn't touched her mic. Yet the voice was clear. She looked down and saw that she was gripping the activation stud on her transmitter. "I remember the sound of guardsmen breaking. I did not like it then." And then the wall behind her exploded. "I do not like it now." Stone and plasteel shattered in a concussive boom as something vast tore through the side of Anchorage Sigma like parchment. A massive silhouette stepped through the smoke, 9 feet tall, black-armored, wreathed in hydraulic hisses and the burning glow of teal optics. A Dreadnought, an Obsidian Spears Dreadnought. The left arm bore a massive storm bolter, already spinning to life. The right, a gleaming power fist wreathed in arc lightning. It bellowed in a voice like grinding stone. "You forgot this world belongs to the Emperor. I have come to remind you." The Obsidian Spears Dreadnought moved like a god made of rusted iron and wrath. The storm bolter spat fire into the cultists, turning bodies into pulp and smoke. With a sweep of his fist, he crushed 3 fanatics at once, their limbs snapping like twigs. "Astra Militarum," he boomed, voice echoing from ancient vox emitters. "Fight and survive." She rose, firing alongside him. "For the Emperor," she screamed. "For Halvorn." A new wave of cultists surged from the far side of the anchorage, led by a twisted thing in a half-shredded commissar's coat. Its third arm held a staff, its mouth ringed with twitching tendrils. "You will not defile the moment of ascension," it shrieked, raising the staff. Tahu didn't let it finish. A pulse of teal light flickered from a recessed muzzle beneath his left vambrace, a graviton pulse. The cult leader imploded with a sickening crack, body folding into itself like a crushed can. "To me!" Brann shouted, waving her people forward. "Rally on the Dreadnought!" Wounded troopers scrambled to move. Halvorn grabbed Koril under one arm. Those still armed pushed forward, using Tahu as a walking wall. Cultists hurled themselves at him in waves, but they died by the dozen. He set one ablaze with his graviton jets. Another he swatted aside, embedded into a plasteel column. Still they came. "Throne," Koril groaned. "He's not going to hold them forever." "No," Brann said grimly, "but we will." She grabbed a fallen laser gun and tossed it to a medic. "You want to live, earn it." The woman caught it and nodded. They formed a ring around the Dreadnought, firing outward. The cult had lost its composure. Now it was frenzy, screams, fanatics hurling themselves into gunfire. The false Captain Valerius came last, mouth gaping wide, eyes full of devotion. Brann shot him through the forehead. Finally, the last cultist dropped. The anchorage was a ruin. Burning canvas, twitching corpses, the stink of promethium and blood. Brann lowered her weapon, gasping. Tahu turned to her. His armor was pocked with burns, ichor slicking his fist, but he stood firm. "Survivors, status." Brann looked around. 18, maybe 20. Fewer than half of what they'd brought. The rest were strewn across the field, broken, burned, or buried beneath the dead. She let the numbers settle in her gut like stone. Behind her, the fires crackled and snapped, feeding on ruined men and shattered armor alike. Smoke clung to everything. Even memory. Tahu hadn't moved. The Dreadnought stood amidst the wreckage like a monument to rage spent, his rotary cannon drooping toward the ground, claw arms slick with cooling ichor. Steam hissed from cracked vents. The teal glow of his eye lenses flickered, dimmer now. "Alive," she said, "thanks to you." The Dreadnought said nothing for a moment. Then, "More are coming. Withdraw to the tunnel." Brann looked up sharply at Tahu. "We didn't break before. We won't now." "Noble words to your credit, Lieutenant," Tahu rumbled. "My brothers are coming, but they are still some distance away. So we will dam the river at its narrowest point. We withdraw, now." "Understood, Lord," she conceded. Tahu turned toward the ruined tunnel he'd made. "More Xenos are coming for us to kill." And without waiting for orders, he marched into the dark. Brann looked at her remaining troopers, bloodied, burned, alive. She raised her voice. "Form up, we're not done yet. The day of ascension can go to hell." And they followed the Dreadnought into the black. Brann realized she could feel it through the ferrocrete beneath her boots, a tremor building like a distant avalanche. Somewhere in the black, the Obsidian Spears were coming, fast. Vaikato led the charge. His mind held every turning of the shaft's lower arteries, and now he drove his brothers through them like a spear thrust into the heart of the void. There was no more stealth, no need. The spears moved with speed that defied their mass, a sprint powered by gene-forged sinew and fury. Black armored shapes, streaking through the dark with teal eye lenses flaring. The signal from Tahu, of a previously unknown Genestealer infestation, had come as a total shock, and now Vaikato was afraid he had sent brave soldiers of the Imperium into the jaws of something worse than death. So now, power packs howled. Boots struck stone with the rhythm of barrage guns. Astartes' hearts pounded like war drums, their breaths deep and measured despite the speed. Vaikato ran helm on now, his spear gripped tightly, his fury in the air behind him like the wake of a torpedo. Back in Anchorage Sigma, Brann's position was falling apart. The first wave had been madmen with stolen uniforms and bolters. The second wave was worse. They came from the smoke and the shadows, Genestealer hybrids tall and hunched, with twisted limbs and chitinous growths, eyes aglow with hive hunger. Some bore scavenged weapons, others charged with claws raised. They moved fast, too fast, and they were coordinated now, directed by a mind not present but near. Tahu fired his stormbolter into them, bursts stitching the air with explosive rounds, pulping flesh and shattering stone. One hybrid leapt onto his sarcophagus. He caught it mid-air, crushed it, and hurled it into another. Brann's survivors fought with the desperation of the already dead. Trooper Kell was down to a las pistol and knife, using both with savage economy. Sergeant Weiss, one eye swollen shut, fired her plasma gun until it clicked empty, then used it as a club. Corporal Laris held the Vox unit, bleeding from a gut wound, still shouting updates until a clawed arm tore it from her hands. Private Denu screamed defiance as he threw his last frag grenade into a knot of hybrids and dragged Sapper Yennik, whose leg was gone, behind cover. Field Medic Taro knelt beside Koril, wrapping his bandaged shoulder in one hand, the other clutching a lascarbine aimed at the advancing cultists. Only Brann, Koril, Weiss, Denu, Kell, Yennik, Laris, and Taro remained, 8 of 700. Then came the shriek. A pure strain, all speed and scything limbs, hurled itself from a high ledge, claws poised for Tahu's sarcophagus. Too fast. Too close. And then it exploded mid-air, bolt round bursting it apart in a rain of viscera. The Obsidian Spears had arrived as a monstrous wave crashing against the shore, utterly destroying everything in their path. Vaikato led them, a streak of black and brass and wrath. He surged through the smoke, spear flashing. One hybrid lost its head, another its spine, both before he landed. Behind him came a squad in a tight wedge, moving like a hammer blow. Bolters spoke, chainswords roared. Smoke lit with muzzle flare and the scream of dying monsters. Astartes slammed into the hybrids with terrifying precision. One drove his blade through a cultist's chest and used the corpse as a shield. Another grabbed a Genestealer hybrid and ripped it in two with power-armored strength. A third fired from the hip, double-tapping retreating foes with surgical economy. Tahu pivoted, blasted a hybrid apart, then turned to the new arrivals. You took your time. Vaikato didn't stop moving. You were meant to hold. We are still here, are we not? Vaikato's spear pinned another hybrid to the wall like a trophy. The remaining hybrids tried to flee, but the tunnel behind them had collapsed, sealed by the force of the spear's arrival. They had nowhere left to run. What followed wasn't battle, it was judgment. Then it was over. In seconds, the anchorage was silent again. Brann stood slowly, rifle trembling in her hands, ears ringing. Around her, the last of her company bled into the floor, but they were alive. Vaikato stepped past her, scanning the perimeter. He stopped beside Tahu, who loomed over the carnage, his chassis scorched, his storm bolter steaming. You held, Vaikato said. Tahu rumbled. She did. His smoking bolter gestured towards Brann. I helped. Vaikato turned to Brann, eyes hidden behind helm glass, but she could feel his attention like a pressure in her bones. She nodded. We held all the way to the edge. He inclined his head just barely, an acknowledgement without ceremony. Then he looked to the tunnels. They'll send more. Brann exhaled. Her fingers tightened around her rifle. So will we. Only in death, quoted Vaikato. Only in death, my lord, replied Brann. You'd think so, wouldn't you? Grumbled Tahu. Together, ancient, Astartes, and mortal, they stepped into the abyssal maw, their purpose a singular, unyielding blade. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you want more.